Thank you for viewing our mission study held virtually on March 20th, 2021. We were blessed with the teaching from the anointed Janet Wolfe, author of Practicing Resurrection, the Gospel of Mark and Radical Discipleship. The meeting started with a warm greeting from our president, Pamela Tate, an inspiring prayer from our spiritual growth coordinator, Georgia Macklin, followed by a few housekeeping items from Kim Henry, education and interpretation coordinator, and a glowing introduction of the speaker from our vice president, Evelyn Tade. We had a few technical difficulties in the beginning, so the video begins after those issues were resolved.
Thanks. So I'm not going to tell the story over again. That'll just have to sit there for a while. What I do hope you will do is in the chat, would you offer up the name you want to be called during this time together? So just a first name or whatever name you want to use. A reminder that in much of the world, many people do not get to choose the name they want to be called. They are called something else by the world around them. So a gift and a privilege we have to name what we want to be called. And then one gift you bring to this time together. If you put that in the chat right now, your name and one gift you bring to this time together, that would be great. And then while some of you are doing that, if you can also attend to maybe kind of quickly looking at a community agreement and seeing if there is something we can add. And I think you'll be able to see that on your screen. Yes? A beginning. So it's just a kind of covenant among us to make sure this is space where we can feel great, where we feel safe. And so just see, is that available on your screen? Do they get to see that one? Yes. So I started out, there may be something you need to want or need to add. There may be something you want clarified. I put everyone as a teacher and everyone as a learner. We're all animators. The wisdom is in the room. So that's an invitation to participate actively, to bring your whole self to this time that we have together. A pledge to have an openness about new ideas and differences. An agreement to offer each other respect, compassion, and honesty. A willingness to listen deeply, which means we're really listening underneath some of the words to find out some of the emotions, and not just waiting to form our reply. Step up, step back, I'm sure you've heard before, but make sure all the voices are valued. Everybody has a time to make a comment, so if you're talking too much, step back a little bit. And then confidentiality. Whatever we say today, if you hear a story from someone other than me, don't take it elsewhere unless you have permission to share. Is there anybody that has a question about any of those or something you would like to add that makes this a comfortable space for you, a place where you can bring your whole self?
Some of your comments: love, compassion, critical thinking.
Critical thinking, love, compassion.
One gift of helping others, communication.
Oh, so those are the gifts they're bringing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to work on this community agreement for a minute while they're offering those gifts. Anything else on the community agreement? Something you need to change, a question you have about something? If not, is there an agreement that we can hold each other accountable for these pieces? And it sounds like from the gifts you put in, you've already made those commitments. So I appreciate the gifts that you bring to this time. If there's nothing else, then I'd really like to set up the text because I believe the wisdom is in the community. And I want to hear the wrestling you do with the text. There are two texts I want to do, and I think I'm hoping you all have Bibles or you have them nearby. And I will read them just to make sure. I want to look at Mark 7, verses 24 through 30, which is the same story told in Matthew 15, 21 through 28. If you're looking at the Matthew text, it may help to know that Jesus says twice in Matthew 10:6 and 15:24, do not go anywhere among the Gentiles. I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So hear these texts, and as you hear them, know that you will be going into small groups. You will either be the woman in this story, the disciples in this story, or Jesus. And as you're thinking about the text, I really want you to forget every sermon you've ever heard on these texts, forget any kind of commentary you read, any already decided notions, and just enter the story from your particular location. This is really hard for most of us because we love to be Jesus in the story, or we want to be the disciples thinking that's the church. But everybody's going to come at this story from a different place. So listen now to these texts from Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And just then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Jesus answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. And then Mark's version, Mark 7, 24 through 30. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin, and she begged Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then Jesus said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. The word of God for the people of God. I can't wait to hear what you find in these texts. So you all are going to go into small groups. Don't forget the first 10 minutes is simply who you are in this story. Forget all the sermons, forget all the large views. Just be who you're assigned to be in this story and find out what's happening in your head and your heart. Why do you say and do the things you say and do? Thank you. I listened in on some of your conversations, so I'm excited to hear your wisdom. Oh. We okay?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I think that if you want to report, you just unmute yourself. Is that true? Okay. So I'm hoping the women will speak first. Reporters from the women's group, this is your story. You got it in Matthew, you got it in Mark. Help us out. Who are you? Why do you do what you do? Somebody?
Who was the recorder in our group? I don't know.
We didn't say.
Okay,
Oh, I thought
we're in the disciples group. We're not in the women's group.
Oh, okay. You're right. But we still.
Group number one.
I nominate Gloria.
Cool. Gloria, come on in.
Gloria, talk.
Are you there?
Gloria.
I'm not in the women's group. I was in the women's group. I was in Jesus' group.
And there's want to hear from Jesus yet.
And there's a designated, there's a designated person too.
Gloria Pillow was in the women's group.
Okay.
Oh, Gloria Pillow. Sorry.
She's not unmuted yet. Will you unmute her then?
You have a loud voice in this story. We're hoping you speak up here.
Where's Gloria?
Oh, no, she
She's
can't.
on mute right now.
No, she's on a, it looks like she's on a phone call, so she can't be the one to respond.
Oh,
Oh, I see.
If that Gloria's on a phone call, can somebody else from the women's group talk with us?
Okay, she's on.
Kristen, you talk.
Laura, I was about to tag you. Okay, I will read what I wrote.
Okay.
I thought it was really powerful that a member of our group encouraged us to speak from the first person, and so I'm going to share with the large group from the first person perspective of the woman. And I have heard about this man Jesus and how he has cured a demon-possessed man, and my daughter is so sick. And I am desperate to find help for her. And even though I am Greek and he is Jewish, I will not take no for an answer. I believe no matter what he says that I can change this man's mind. And no matter where he is, I'm going to find him. And I know that this man can heal my daughter. I will do anything. The end.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was hard for me to hear part of that, so I just want to make sure I understood. What I hear you saying is you were unwilling to give up. The desperation that you felt propelled you to persist.
Janet, excuse me.
Yeah.
This is Gloria Pillow. I'm so sorry. I have zero technological skills, and I had to call my husband from outside. My screen froze. I couldn't unmute. I heard you calling, and I don't want to take anyone's time. I just wanted to apologize and say, yes, I could hear every single thing.
Okay.
We are all struggling with technology today. We're going to persist through it. I believe we can do it.
Yes.
I'll be 73 in May. If I can do it, I think everyone can. We'll figure this out. So I just want to hear again, and Gloria, if you want to add anything added from the women's group, I want to make sure I really heard what you were saying.
Was it Kristen who gave the initial report just now?
Yes.
That was wonderful, especially the idea from another woman in our group who suggested we speak in the first person. That really made it much more personal to us. But we also, in terms of your radical discipleship, that I learned so much from reading your book, Janet, so much. This was a story of inclusion, of almost forced inclusion, that I actually almost commanded upon Jesus, the healer, because I am not male, I am not a disciple, I am not Jewish, I come from a different culture, but yet my love for my child has driven this great courage that I have somehow found for her that I might not have found for myself, to defeat all of these exclusionary practices, even from the Son of God, to say, I need healing.
Exactly. I mean, this is Alice Walker's definition of womanist, right?
Yes, it is. Yes,
a woman
it is.
Who will not be silenced, will
That's
not
right.
be pushed away, dismissed, or sent to the sidelines.
That's
who
right.
also uses the language of oppression to come right back into the loud no's that she's gotten.
That's right.
Anybody else from the women's group want to add? We're going to come back to you, so continue to be loud. Let me see. Let's go to the disciples. Somebody from the disciples group?
Yes, this is Cynthia.
Help us understand who you are and why you want to send this woman away.
Yes. Can you hear me?
No,
No?
it's hard to hear. A little bit louder. There you go. That's better.
You can't hear me, or you can?
We can.
I can't.
Okay. As the disciples, we are Jesus's security squad. You know, Jesus is tired. He's been walking around. He's been doing a lot of things. So we want to protect him physically, and also we want to protect the established church, if I can say that in quotes, the establishment, the way it has been. So this isn't the way it has been. Who is this woman? She's the other. She's not one of us. So Jesus, don't talk to her, and you go away. You go away. But she wouldn't go away. Someone said before, she wouldn't be silenced. Basically, I'm speaking. So, you know, but I don't know if she had that confidence or not. But the disciples were, no. This is not done. You're a foreigner. We're not doing this.
We could argue, if we're disciples, that we were scared. John the Baptist has already been executed. Pharisees and Sadducees, folks are after us. Jesus is not on the high list of wanted for good things.
Right.
There's conspiracies happening. So, yeah, you are a security squad. You are trying to take care. What else?
And I'm trying to think one of the other things before we wanted to talk about the woman too. We were
oh no,
we
you
were
don't
saying
get to
her
talk
number
about
one
the
thing
woman.
is hope. But let me go back to disciples. Yes.
Unless you can explain to us why you want to send her away. Poor woman. You want to send her away?
Yeah. You know, she's not one of us. And unfortunately, we feel like the disciples, that was their first instinct. As in many stories we hear, the disciples wanted to keep it this way. They did not understand, at least right away, what Jesus was. Why are you doing this? And, you know, why even think about healing her? She doesn't believe as we believe. Again, she's not even from here, and she's a woman. So, and then we ask, do you think the disciples changed their minds or had their minds opened or their eyes opened when they saw Jesus, who at first was like, hold on just a second. And the woman was like, no. Let me tell you, Jesus, what's going on. And then Jesus healed her. So I think they thought, yes. And then, wait, why did Jesus do that? And so a lot of people in our group thought probably the disciples' minds were changed, or at least they were started to change. And that's what we hope. Again, we think that they were his security squad, protecting him. He was tired, all these things. And we wanted, this wasn't someone that's with us. This person is against us, or not against us, but she's not one of us. And unfortunately, we see that, and this was a discussion too, or a comment, that we see that in our current churches sometimes, our congregations.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. I want to come back to what does this look like when it shows up in our churches and communities. So hold on.
Okay.
I think the other thing about the disciples is we could argue, you know, if you're reading a red letter version of the Bible, twice Jesus has already told us, do not go among the Gentiles. We're only sent for the lost sheep, the house of Israel. There's enough problems there. Why do we need to deal with other people? Absolutely. Good job, disciples. Let's hear from Jesus, who has the most to explain in this story. This is the harshest statement we have anywhere in the Bible.
I have just surrounded myself with a group of men from my own faith. I've challenged them to take on this ministry with me to change our faith. This is for our faith group. And who is this woman from outside of our culture and our group who comes with a request when we're already doing all we can to work with the group that we've chosen to work with? But then when the woman has such great faith, when she says, yes, but even the dogs pick up the crumbs under the table. This was an epiphany. Maybe this ministry is broader than we suspected. If it includes,
a little bit louder,
if it includes everyone who has faith, and not just those who were born into this group. And to think, it was a woman who changed the perspective on the whole ministry.
Right. So, I mean, if you listen to Jesus in this text, you can hear his resounding no turn into this amazingly powerful yes, right? Jesus is converted. He's transformed. He's evangelized. In this text, Jesus shifts from one pronouncement to the other. Confronted by this woman, Jesus will go on to create a table where nobody waits for crumbs. He will never say again, we're only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So as we wrestle with this text, I think the disciples started to go to so where does it give us hope? Where does it challenge us? Where might it change us? What does it look like if it takes on flesh in our congregations, in our communities? Anybody? I think you can unmute yourself and chime in. You can hold your hand and they'll help unmute you.
I think it says so much about, again, inclusion rather than exclusion. I love the way you use the term domestication in your book. We have become, it is true, my father was a United Methodist minister. We have become a church, and churches in other denominations have become churches of privilege to some extent and comfortability. And we don't like stories that make us uncomfortable. That's why this good news for us in this story, the way you have taken us through the learning of what the woman means, what the disciples meant, what happened with Jesus, is so extraordinary. But it's not good news for some people, because Jesus is never supposed to be wrong, if I dare use the terms right and wrong. But we so often, people come into the church, maybe they aren't wearing very nicely presented clothes, maybe they don't speak English with grammatical precision. Maybe there are a whole lot of things, and I'm just talking about individuals, not to mention the things that should be done with community, but instead we've sort of cocooned ourselves in so many instances so that we're not a part of the community outreaching. We're a non-part of the community, comfortable in our church. I love that you made me uncomfortable so much as I read this book. It's good for the soul.
I mean, and I'm just wondering that what it means for us to reclaim the Bible. For so long I was convinced only pastors could tell me what was in the Bible, and it had a little bit of relevance to my life, but not a whole lot unless I was sad and wanted to read something comforting. But what does it mean for us to immerse ourselves back into these stories and to be stunned by the fact that we have two versions of a story in which Jesus is utterly transformed?
Yeah.
What would it take for the church to believe we could be transformed by folks who are outside of our faith tradition, outside of our culture, outside of our ethnicity, outside of this nation, who are crying for the healing of their children, right? Who insist there's a wideness in God's mercy, who will not put up with our narrow theologies, ideologies, structures, systems, practices, traditions that exclude folks from God's incredible grace. How do we begin to embody this kind of invitation in our congregations and our communities?
I would like to say that, for many, many, many years, over 150 years, United Methodist women have been ministering a great deal to persons that they feel are in need, and most of those persons wind up being sending some type of services or help to someone in Africa or Asia or South America. And that's around the world. I think United Methodist women have done a great job in 150 years of ministering around the world, taking in various missions and teaching women in other countries. But I think sometimes we forget we also need to minister around the corner. Yes. And around the corner is in our own immediate neighborhoods, and in a current world quite different from Jesus' world. We're very diverse for the most part, much more diverse within our communities than they ever were. Pretty much, I think, in Jesus' time, they kept their diversity separate. There were pods of Samaritans and Gentiles and Jews, and they kind of stuck together. But in today's environment, in today's communities and neighborhood, I think we need to keep in mind there's a lot of people next door to our church that need help. So that's just basically around the corner, as I said. But I think overall, United Methodist Women have done a pretty good job of ministering around the world. So I think to be what Jesus wants us to be, we need to look a little closer to home sometimes.
Yeah. And maybe even if I can kind of invert that, does this woman minister to Jesus?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what would it mean for us to be open to being challenged and changed by voices and hopes and dreams and struggles of those who are far outside our social locations, where we are, what we see, what we think.
One of the things that occurred to me in going through this was God speaking to Jesus through this woman.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And how does the church hear? I mean, if we had time, we would make a list of all the voices we don't hear, we dismiss, we have already decided don't belong as part of the covenant people. And then we would figure out how we begin to listen to those voices. And then we would begin to figure out how those voices might change and challenge our theology and our practices. I think I said in the book that Ted Myers and Walter Wink argue that all the gospel healings are not simply about an individual healing. They are public challenges to narrow theologies, to institutions and structures that have dismissed people. So what might it mean for us to really be changed by this text? And to see women as not only disciples, but, the Mark 14 piece that I start the book out with, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. To see women as central to the gospel story, central as to the understanding of what it means to be a disciple. Anybody?
Well, I kept thinking also of how Peter and Paul must have used this story to decide whether to expand to the Jews, beyond the Jews, to the Gentiles.
Yes, too bad they became a bit more carefully to the woman as the instrument of conversion, because they become a bit narrow about the role of women. But yes, expand the notion of how wide God's mercy is. There's another piece in here that's interesting, which is faith is something you can see.
Yes.
Right? It's not some agreement to a right doctrine. It's not a particular profession of faith. It's not church attendance. It's something you can see. You embody faith. When Jesus looks at this woman, when Jesus sees the 4 people carrying the man on the mat in Mark 2, when Jesus sees Bartimaeus hollering in the streets, when Jesus sees the father who brings his child, when Jesus sees their faith, then he says, what does it mean to have our faith seen in action, not just in words? Where can I go to see your faith? Where can you go to see mine? What would it look like in our churches and communities if faith took on flesh? This kind of fierce, will not be silent, wildly disturbing faith. Anybody?
One of the things I think we've gotten away in the Methodist Church, which is one of our basic principles, I think, is sacred worth. If we view every individual as having the sacred worth given by God, then how can we exclude them?
Right.
How can we do that? Because someone may see me as the other and want to exclude me. And so I really think that our faith world, our theology, and I believe that came from John Wesley himself about sacred worth. We've got to teach that better. And I think through these stories, Jesus recognized that woman's and her daughter's sacred worth. I think it was the human tiredness in him that said, go away, get away from me. He was fully human. And do we ever get that tired that we just don't want to be bothered? And he was trying to get away and hide. So he was just like, I'm done with this. Don't bother me right now. But she taught him. And then he had to recognize her and her daughter's sacred work.
And we're all formed by the world around us, right? I mean, that's the power of social location that I try to talk about in the book. And whole Howard Thurman's thing about the gospel is here, where folks' backs are against the wall, not from a choice, but because the system's relentlessly pushing them there. So born among a community that's occupied by the military, that's impoverished, that is continually battered and bruised and oppressed. Here's where the gospel takes shape. Here's where Jesus is born. And Howard Thurman argues so many churches are over here, so that we cannot see and we cannot hear. And when we get this far away, we become theological justifiers. Or Walter Wink calls us kept chaplains of an unjust order. We start giving reasons for why these systems exist and these people are over here, other than the systemic oppression.
Right.
And that shows up in our church, right? I mean, it shows up in our understandings. United Methodist Women have relentlessly combated some of that. But it's hard work. How do we begin to help folks see the narrowness sometimes of our social location and move ourselves to a place where we can hear and see more? Anybody?
Yeah,
Let me
right
put it
now.
a different way while you're thinking. So the last church I served, Hobson United Methodist Church in East Nashville, I was there 7 years. We did participatory Bible study with a number of texts to try to figure out what it means to be church. One of the texts was this one, and they liked alliteration, so they came up with, what does it mean for us to put flesh on this text? They came up with powerful prayer, arguing that doing justice is not the work of a social action committee. It is the heart of everything we do, and so prayer changes us. Prayer is listening to God. When we listen, we will be changed, and it's powerful because it moves us to new places. So they said powerful prayer, meaning what are we doing in worship? What are we doing in Bible study? What are we doing in all the other places that actually allows us to hear God and to be willing to be changed by that? Persistent proximity was the second one. How can we move to places on an ongoing basis, not just once or twice a year, but every week, every day if possible, where we can hear and see and be in the middle of the struggle? And the third one was passionate practice with partners. They said it had to be passionate because it has to come from your heart. Practice because we're going to get it wrong, right? For anybody who has done work in communities you do not come from, you know you're going to make mistakes and you have to be ready to practice. And so you do it with partners because it is working with people and not designing programs 2 and 4 where we actually immerse ourselves into stories such as this and reevaluate what it means to be church. So Cynthia says, comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable. Yeah, and I think that's right. I would also add maybe invite the comfortable to rethink, right? Because I have to say, and I try to tell stories in the book, over and over, I get things wrong. I tell the story in the book about, I was a single mom. I had 3 part-time jobs, 2 kids. I had no clue how I was going to make it through. Then I become a community organizer. I helped start an organization. And one day into the church where I'm working with this organization, a woman walks in with 2 children and she's asking for food. And I'm filled with all my understandings now that I have about how food contributes to the well-being of a child. And I say something to her like, I ask her when was the last time she ate? And she says, 2 days ago. And I say, don't you know that eating is so important because otherwise your child will not grow to be healthy. And she looks at me and says, I feed the one whose cries I hear. So even though I had been in that place, when I moved to a different place, I forgot. I could no longer hear. I was no longer challenged by. So it's an ongoing process, I think, for most of us who have incredible power and privilege, even with whatever struggles we're going through, to figure out how we become open to folks who really might change, challenge, transform our theology, our practices, our understandings of the urgent call to be the church in and for the world right here and right now. Somebody else, help us out. What do you want to do with this story? What do you hear?
Well, our
Remind
church at Creewood is now practicing what we call radical hospitality. We have a congregational care team, and we take all the members of our church, over 12 people, and we contact them by phone or email, and we go into the system called Online Realm, and we put notes in for the minister and associate pastor to see how the membership is doing, because we haven't been able to have church meetings until recently. So that has helped, and I have learned a lot about people and what their needs really are. And sometimes they just want to hear from somebody. And they'll say, well, I don't want to be a bother. And I'll say, well, you're not a bother. You're part of our church community, and you're important to us. And here's my phone number, and call me, call the minister, call whoever. But don't let your needs go unmet, because there's hundreds of us to help you, and to really be sincere about it, and know that if that phone rings, you better be ready to go help, and then do it. And
Well,
most
and then maybe
everybody likes the
Go
program.
ahead. Was somebody else going to say something? Then I'll move into, I was going to say, maybe that invites us to consider charity and justice. Services, direct services in forms of charity can be what initially connect us with people, can be ways that we hear and learn and are next to and accompany. But how does that move us towards changing systems and structures? How does it move us towards justice? Anybody want to jump in?
Real quick, I think one of the things that we see within the church right now is the fight for justice for everyone to have a place at the table, that we need to change the book of discipline, or actually put it back, take out what was added that actually isn't practicing radical hospitality, that is separating people from the saying you're different, you're too different, and using the Bible as a weaponizing it. You talked about theological justifiers.
Yeah.
Well, that's just my 2 cents there.
No, I think that's really an important piece. And I think I talk about a couple places in the book that Ched Myers and Walter Wink and Ted Jennings talk about how gospel healings shift the scandal. So at the beginning of the story, the scandal is this woman, or the scandal is Bartimaeus hollering, or the scandal is the folks breaking through the roof, lowering the man on the mat. But the scandal shifts so that the scandal are the disciples. The scandal is Jesus in his first response. And in the shifting of that kind of theology, we're moved to a different place to ask very different questions about what it means to be the church, and about redefining what it means to be in ministry with folks. What else?
It's so hard to change minds, and to, first of all, to know what is, quote, right, what is wrong, what is better, what is not. But, you know, there are certain guidelines we can look at. A question, is this exclusionary or inclusionary? Is this respectful or disrespectful? Is this being humane or not humane? Is this kind or not kind? And so often, you know, we church people, again, Janet, the whole idea of scandal, it needs to be reversed. And as, quote, Christians, we fail to see it ourselves. And we do use the Bible to support systems of exclusion and systems of disrespect of other human beings. Sometimes I think it's just as basic as, okay, how can we just, my great grandson says, Gigi, that's not kind. What that man did is not kind. And I thought, my God, he's 4 years old and he already gets it in ways that so many of us don't. We try so hard to preach to other people that we are excluding them, we are judging them, and we have to work from places, I think, that begin with how do we change our own spirits? How do we open our own spirits to the possibility that maybe they're not the scandal, maybe we're not the scandal, because we are not understanding basic humanity and respect.
Amen. Yeah. The powers and principalities, the systems of domination reside in us.
They
are constantly fed and forced and pushed by these systems that shape our world, which is why I use that piece from Dorte Zole about every day we got to practice amazement.
You're right.
We got to wake up to wonders of God's good creation. We got to stop being numb, stop being seduced by empire. Walter Brueggemann talks about how we can't even imagine because we don't have language that challenges this norm, the way of speaking. And so, yeah, every day we got to practice amazement, to wake up, to be caught up in wonder and awe. Every day we have to unlearn and let go, because you and I and all of us have been taught things that we need to let go of. I can think of a whole bunch of stuff. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta's on my heart now for the murders that just happened. What's the power of our language? How can I unlearn some language that I know is damaging and just let it go? And that's a daily practice, not a once and for all. And then her third piece is we resist the systems of death in order to heal ourselves and our communities and our congregations and our world. And we heal so that we can resist. And again, those are daily practices, and they're very much like our baptismal bath, right? Yes. We are asked, do you accept the freedom and the power God gives you to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? And Wesley was fierce about that. Wesley often talked about systems and how, you know, the money we spend, it's a squandering of the wealth that belongs to everybody instead of to just us.
That's right.
So where do we begin? We go back to our congregations, our communities. What are some things concretely that we might put into place that help us become radical disciples?
I don't know if this qualifies or not, but I want to share an experience that I've had in the last week. I am applying to refinance my condo because I'm getting cheap money. And so all of these people want to do it electronically. And I say, look, I'm an old woman. I don't know how to do all this. And to almost to a person on the other end of the phone, they go, you're not old, as if old is bad.
Right, right.
And so what I did to them is I said, I'm bragging to you. I'm not defensive about being old. It's a privilege for me to get old.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is just a very basic thing that I have experienced this week. Others want to argue with me that I'm not old because and I have had to transform that thinking in me that who I am and the fact that I've gotten to live this long is a privilege and a blessing.
Yeah.
So we can't reinforce old as negative. We have to change that. But every one of them
since I'm moving in that direction, I agree with that.
So if we then,
who else?
Whatever it is we're oppressed about, if we claim that and don't feel ashamed of it, does that help our society? I don't know. I'm asking.
I do think that's part of the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer community now is it is not that suddenly we have more people, but it is suddenly that folks feel enough community, enough solid ground to stand on, be able to name ourselves, so that resistance is inevitable in that. There's always going to be a backlash, but to name ourselves for who we really are is a huge gift and a huge risk, particularly in this time. And again, I go back to the murders in Atlanta and wonder what our silence on other incidences of violence, what our language around Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders has done to create an environment where a sheriff can say, he was just having a bad day. Yeah, how do we contribute? What are the pieces in our own lives and the lives of our congregations and communities that we might begin to challenge and take apart and transform so that we move towards this radical discipleship?
It's so easy for us to say, hey, we don't know them, so they don't matter. So we need to start treating people as if they're our brother or sister, because that's who they are. Yes. But it's so easy for us to say, he's just a beggar on the street. He don't matter. We don't need to help him. Or, you know, they shouldn't be the way they are, so we shouldn't help them. But if we look at them as, hey, that's my sister. If she's on the street, I'm going to help her. I'm going to give her what she needs to get off that street. Or if she's a gay or lesbian, I'm going to help her to accept herself. That way she feels more comfortable coming to me versus just blowing them off.
Exactly. And I'm going to keep pushing on. And how do we change the systems that are doing our sinning for us? So if we may not individually be doing a battering or belittling of someone, but the systems and the structures and the theologies and the practices of our churches do, how do we change those? Pardon? Right. Cynthia wants to know, and that's exactly what I'm asking. What would the world look like if we disrupt the systems of oppression? The United Methodist Women had, was it 2 years ago? There was a gathering called Disruptive Discipleship. Was that it? I'm vaguely remembering. Anyway, yes, United Methodist Women have worked on doing that. And what does it look like at our local level? For example, here's a challenging one. What about the Sabbath economics? Anybody want to take that on?
You got to help me understand that, because that's a concept I'm having trouble with.
It's a
I
concept.
wish we had more time. I'll do it really quick. When the Hebrew people are brought out of bondage and they're in the wilderness, God creates a covenant. And the covenant includes lots of pieces like the 10 Commandments and other pieces. And the covenant is about systems and structures and theologies. So the reason we worship once a week is not to put money in the collection plate, though that's a very good thing, or check off our attendance at church, another good thing, to belong to the community. It is to remember who we are, that we have been called out of Egypt. We have been called out of Pharaoh's economy. We have been called out of Pharaoh's theology. We have been called out of Pharaoh's culture to be an alternative in the world. And so our once a week gathering is a way to, in this book, it would be practice resurrection. We say no to all these systems that are denying so many people the right to life. And we say yes to the God of life, who gives us the power to resist and change and transform, unmask, name all these systems. And Sabbath economics is a part of that. So the Jubilee in Exodus reminds us that, you know what, even best intentions, you're going to forget. Even being reminded once a week, you're going to forget. So every 7 years, you're going to have to start over. You're going to have to release debts. You're going to have to release lands. You're going to have to renew the earth. You're going to have to redistribute wealth. And then you know what? Because even with all those things, you're still going to mess it up every 7 times 7 plus 1, every 50 years. You just wipe all the debt out and you start over again, saying manna was given as a gift. And we remember the story because when we hoard it, it rots. that there's enough for absolutely everyone if we follow this kind of economy that is a manna economy that roots us in a theology of abundance instead of a theology of scarcity. So then a Sabbath economics is remembering every week we're coming out of a world. Jim Lawson, the nonviolent civil rights trainer and a Methodist pastor, would argue we come out of this world of plantation capitalism and white supremacy to remember this whole different way of being. And that we're called to be known by our love. And we're called to be signs of the kingdom of God. So people are supposed to look at us and say, oh, whoa, you know, they're Jesus people because they're loving so large. And they are serious about rooting in the common good and not simply pulling things in for themselves. Does that help? That's a quick version of it. And the story in Mark 10 is a great story. I urge you to do the participatory Bible study, really wrestle with what Jesus says, because he changes the wording of the 10 Commandments and uses defraud to make it even clearer that this is about systems and structures. The disciples are absolutely stunned. Who then can enter the kingdom of God? It's so hard. And Jesus says, yeah, it is. Does that help?
Yes.
It does, but it's still hard.
No, it's hard. I think it's meant to be hard. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's why discipleship is radical, because it challenges me every single day. It challenges everything we do, say, think, invest in. Yeah. I mean, what would somebody say about my values if they only reviewed my bank account and my calendar? Ooh, that's a little scary.
I think that one of the exciting things
Somebody else
about
want to take on Sabbath economics?
Marty, did you want to say something before I tell a story quickly?
Well, I was just going to say that today we saw the power of a woman's story, of a woman talking about her children. And I think that when we use our stories, that we can make a difference too, because I know it was talking to a woman about her child who was gay, changed my life. And so I think as we bring our stories to people, that we can change lives too.
Yes, thank you.
My story on Sabbath economics, at least I was reminded of this decades ago when I was a child in Nashville, attending church. You know, Easter was not only the day of resurrection, but for real, it was a day when we got to show off our pink taffeta dresses and our pretty little white socks and our new little white patent leather shoes and our little hats. And we loved that so much. And then there was this year when a lot of activity occurred within the community, and every single one of us, children and adults alike, came to church in last year's Easter clothes. They were too small. The colors had faded. The pastels were no longer brilliant. We finally decided as a community, we are not going to pay money anymore to be disrespected. We're not going to go downtown where we can't try on the pretty little dress because somehow something's wrong with our skin, but we can pay the money for it. And that was the most powerful Easter that church had seen.
Wow. That was an incredible moment in the history of Nashville. It really was. Yeah, quite. And I mean, it invites us to think about the disconnects between the way we celebrate Easter and Christmas and the biblical stories, right? Yeah. So the women are terrified as well as amazed on Easter, but they wouldn't have any room for Easter hats. This is not a Lily kind of story. This is the beginning of a radical revolution. This is an uprising. This is a calling back into the streets of Galilee where Jesus had his ministry, where after only 3 years with his confrontation with powers, he's executed in a state-sanctioned murder. Yeah, that's not the Easter we normally have, nor is it the Christmas, right? Think about the Christmas rituals and traditions we have, and then think about Matthew and Luke's story of Christmas, which shook up an empire, made them so anxious they started murdering babies because it was such a threat. Yes. And again, that's part of the Sabbath economics. So how do we do justice instead of simply this charity. Because again, Howard Thurman would argue, charity can be a form of violence.
Yeah.
It robs people of their identity and their vocation. Instead of being a child of God whose vocation is to join God in the repair of the world, those of us who are objects of charity suddenly become folks who need from people who have, and our vocation is to be thankful. How do we redefine what we're doing in the church to move towards this place where we become signs of the kingdom of God? Anybody?
I read at one time, I forget what United Methodist Women had me doing, but I was reading about poverty, and I read an article about the big business of poverty and charity.
Yeah.
And it was telling stories of how people who thought they were doing good were really harming another community. And one of the examples was that a Sunday school class out of Atlanta decided that there was a country that had famine, and they were going to help this little village by supplying eggs. They were going to send eggs to this community. But at that same time, a man in the community had sold everything he had and invested in chickens.
Yes.
But who's going to buy his eggs when they got them free? So after 1 year, that Sunday school class decided they needed a new project. So the net of it was it harmed that community because that man had to go out of business.
Yeah.
Right,
So
and community organizing, there's a phrase, nothing about us without us. If the folks hardest hit by whatever the issue is are not there making decisions, designing what's going to happen, it's already become a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our churches replicate that in a lot of ways, right? Our mission programs sometimes do more harm than good.
One of the things we do is
they could be called Christian education for first world Christians.
One of the things we do is we take the people that we're trying to help and we make them rely on us versus like, I like the fact that like, I can't think of his name. He's a country music artist, but he's got a store in Nashville where if you hit a poverty line, you can go in there and shop. So you let them have some kind of humility, some kind of dignity about themselves, but they can still, hey, I can go in and shop, and maybe if I help myself, then I can start doing this at a regular store.
Yeah, that again, I want to push the issue of justice. So why are people poor? What perpetuates poverty? What does it mean that often in our Christmas programs, we have toys for kids who are in poverty, who don't have resources for other things, and then we wait till next Christmas to give out more gifts? But we have not changed by creating a living wage. We have not changed by opening access to health insurance. We have not changed by joining, I don't know if you just saw, but in Nashville, there was a huge settlement over restaurants who were stealing wages from wait staff. That often happens with immigrant population in Nashville, where construction firms will pick up workers at the day labor pool and then siphon off a good chunk of their wages. How do we change the systems, which is the really hard part? And one of the invitations I would offer, because I know our time's coming, we got about 18 minutes left, but this Easter is the anniversary of the murder, execution, assassination of Dr. King. I'm convinced Dr. King was executed because on April 4th, 1967, he stood in Riverside and condemned the war in Vietnam. And he tied together materialism and militarism and the economic exploitation of folks and racism. And so I would invite us to rethink this whole Lenten journey and journey towards Easter in light of what it means that Easter is going to happen, as it has before, on the anniversary of Dr. King's death, and how that pulls us into really rethinking the systems. Why are so many people impoverished in this country? Why do we have an incarceration rate of people in this country that's higher than any nation in the world. We incarcerate a higher percentage of our citizens. Why do we criminalize young kids? I have 5 sons. When my kids were growing up in school, they got detention, but they did not get criminalized. And they did a lot of the stuff that other folks, particularly Black and brown young folks, get hauled into prison for. And a kid who's hauled into juvenile and given a criminal record is 50% more likely to show up in prison. How do we take apart this cradle to prison pipeline that for me means from the day a kid is born in this country, there's a system that is sucking them into the prison system that intends to criminalize them and to make it so that those of us who are unaware of that system see them as criminals. What does that mean for the church? That's a theological issue. Where will we be as witnesses to an alternative to the way the world is organized? Anybody come back and challenge me. I'm happy for anybody to ask any question or challenge me.
I was just going to say about the decriminalization and marginalization of people of color. That I have a brother in prison. He is white and he deserves to be there because he broke the law. However, I feel that he needs more help than he needs to be in a private system. He needs to be in a non-privatized system where, I mean, he has to work and make money to pay for his food, his clothes, whatever he needs to stay there. And I don't think that's right, because by the time he gets out, he's still not gone to trial, but by the time he gets out, he will not have been rejuvenated or taught anything or learned any new way of living. Sober living would be helpful for him. And I know a lot of people, that's true. They're just warehoused in these places because that's people get paid. The people that
right. So it's another
prison,
exactly right. It's another part of plantation capitalism. Everything in the prison system is part of making money. Yeah. That people are warehoused in order to make money, whether it's the phone calls or it's the commissary. It's wages. You know, wages in Tennessee prisons start at 17 cents an hour. Right. And the very people that, corporations that people work for inside prisons will not hire them when they get out. United Methodists have a resolution in the Book of Resolutions, which is worth reading every now and then, and in the Book of Discipline, which is also worth reading so we can change parts of it and hold parts of it, on restorative justice. We call it transformative justice because we think some things should not be restored, some things can't be restored. But when did we start saying, you know, if you broke a law, how do we punish them, instead of asking what harm was done? How do we repair the harm? Who could be partners in repairing the harm? That's a whole different lens. We do circles inside the prison, and I got a note from one of my friends the other day who has been caged for 26 years. And he said that he watched an officer eating orange, and the officers threw the last third of it in the trash. And when the officer left, he pulled the orange out of the trash, and it was the best thing he had eaten in 26 years because it was the first time in 26 years he'd had fresh fruit. What does it mean that we are caging? And caging people at a young age, you know, in Tennessee, and I know we don't have time for all this, but in Tennessee, a life sentence is 51 years. I have a friend who was sentenced at 16. That means he will be 67 before anyone considers his case, before anyone reviews anything. That's a sentence to death. And so I hope the church takes seriously our charge to follow this one who was criminalized, who was tortured, and who was executed in a state-sanctioned murder. Jesus was executed by the state.
Well, if you think about it, just this week,
I really invite us to wrestle hard with this stuff. We have about 12 minutes left. Anybody have an urgent question, a wrestling, a challenging you'd like to offer?
Well, I just want to say this before we go any further. If you think about it, just this week alone, we had a case where there was a black male pulled over and he had a warrant granted Well, because he didn't pull a gun on anything, but he didn't do exactly what the police officer said. They shot into his car and shot his 1-year-old child.
Right.
But then you had this young man that went into this nail salon, shot, what, 8 people?
8 people.
And they just arrested him.
Right.
Versus if he had been a black male, I'm almost positive they would have killed him.
They would, yeah, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't see the justice in that. I don't see if a warrant. I don't know what the warrant was for, but it couldn't have been for killing 8 people.
Right.
And that's part of the overall question is an interesting question to ask is who defines crime in this country? Right. And why are some things a crime and others are not? And who benefits from that definition? So when a governor cuts 250,000 people off of health care, and we in the community document 47 deaths the first year, why is that not a crime? But if I pick up a drug that someone has labeled illegal, I don't do anything illegal to get it, I don't do anything illegal because I have it, I might spend 20, 25 years in a cage. Yeah. Who defines crime in this country and who benefits from that definition? Absolutely. And then the other thing is to really look at Christian supremacy and white supremacy and the ways that our theology, in particular Christian theology in this country, has not only perpetuated, but has theologically justified white supremacy. And the United Methodist Church, as many programs as we've done on racial reconciliation, continues to be a part of the system that props that stuff up. So you talk about the witch hunts for folks who may be working with people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, but I don't remember the last time in the state of Tennessee or any place in the United States where the United Methodist pastor was held accountable for espousing white supremacist theology from the pulpit. What does it mean for us to be the church in this particular place and time?
The church has to be the woman, you know, the woman in the story. The church has to never stop, persist. We need learning from the ground up. You know, it's remarkable that just last year, congressmen, senators, a president was able to say there's no such thing as institutional systemic racism in this country, and that millions of people agree with that. We cannot stop, and it's very uncomfortable. It truly is, but that has something to do with how we show our faith as people of God, as children of God, and we show who we are by stepping out of the comfortability. And if we see something unjust happening, not just walking past and saying, oh, well, that's okay. Or as you said, he was having a bad day. No, that's incredible. We have to persist and continue. And in the face of abject ignorance, we can't stop. We can't stop.
Denise Johnson Reagan was one of the original freedom singers, founded Sweet Honey in the Rock, incredible music. And she tells a story about being in a church in Montgomery during the Civil Rights Movement. And they know the dogs and the hoses are waiting outside for them. So they decide we'll sing one more song. And somebody suggests, let's sing This Little Light of Mine. And then somebody says, let's sing This Little Light of Ours, because we're doing this collectively. And an older woman stands up in the back and says, no, I want you to sing This Little Light of Mine, because it's only when you and you and you and you agree to let your light shine that I find the courage to walk back out there. But then she said, our light's going to shine so bright, I have to put on shades just to walk by. For us to allow the light of God to shine in and through us over and over again as congregations, as communities, as individuals. I thank you for this time. I think we're about done. I would ask you to do 2 things. One is to put your name and one gift you're going to take from this time together. And the other is to feel free to contact folks who have been a part of this and me with any questions, so that whoever you've been in touch with, I'm sure they know how to find me, and easy to find. I may not be easy to find for the next week or so, but after that I am, and I just am so grateful to United Methodist Women for each of you for joining. I'm going to read a thank you to you at the end. This is in the study guide that's available free on the United Methodist Women's website. It's taken, it's words from a Canadian theologian, Alison Huntley, who wrote a book, Daring to be United. And I've adapted it a little bit with her permission, but I'm offering this up to you all. To all who have loved with fierce loyalty or tender pride, with great courage and against all odds, risking their reputation, their jobs, their friends, their family, even their lives, to all those who have put love before security, refusing to be bound by the fetters of law or fear or convention, who by their daring have created new paths in wild places. To all who love, I say thank you. To all who have challenged sexual oppression by speaking out, taking responsibility, calling others to account, changing their language and their behavior, creating safe space, sharing power. To all those who have protected the vulnerable, welcomed the outcast, shared bread, given shelter, stood vigil, written letters, spoken out, stood to be counted. To all those who have worked to make this world tender and more just, I say thank you. To all those who have dared to ask for what they are entitled to, who have refused to be ignored or turned back or passive or victims, who by their persistent belief that justice is not only right but possible, have halted armies, changed structures, saved forests, fed children. To all people who have demonstrated justice, I say thank you. To all those who have chosen to be family, who have adopted children, loved someone of their own gender, liked their in-laws, formed unusual alliances and unlikely friendships, created community, nurtured hope, befriended themselves and one another. To all those who have discovered that community is not built like a wall, but grown like a garden, and have chosen to tend that garden, seen one another through, wept, listened, plotted, and made possible, knowing that family is, in the largest sense, a choice and a gift. To all those who have chosen to be family, I say thank you. I deeply appreciate your time, your questions, your challenges. I hope to be in touch. God bless.
Thank you.